Good afternoon to everyone with us. On behalf of the St. John Paul II Institute of Culture, I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's conference. Among our guests, I would like to especially kindly greet Mr. Marek Sorgowicki, Charge d'Affaires of the Embassy of Poland to the Holy See, who has joined us. The focus of our conference is the Blessed Ulma family of 9, martyred for aiding their Jewish neighbors during World War II in Poland in the 1930s. The conference is possible thanks to the generous support of donors and friends of the Angelicum and of the St. John Paul II Institute of Culture, whom I would like to cordially thank. The plan of the conference will include an opening lecture, followed by the panel discussion, and we will end today with a screening of the documentary film titled The Ulmas, A Blessed Family. The film will not be streamed online and will be available only for the participants on site. It is now my great honor to introduce to you the first of our eminent guest speakers in the conference, Dr. Mateusz Szpytma. Dr. Szpytma is a historian and researcher and the deputy president of the Institute of National Remembrance in Poland. He received his master's degrees in history and political science at the Jagiellonian University, at which he also defended his doctoral thesis in modern Polish history. A focal point of Dr. Szpytma research and educational work is the story of the Ulma family, murdered by Nazi Germans on 24 March 1944 in Markowa village in southern Poland, along with the Jews from the Goldman, Greenfeld, and Didner families, whom they had been hiding. Dr. Szpytma is the author, co-author, and editor of numerous historical books, including several about the rescue of Jews by Poles during German occupation, including the book The Risk of Survival from 2009. In addition, the books and press writings on the subject, he is the founder and creator of the Ulma Family Museum of Poles Saving Jews in World War II in Markowa, as well as the curator of the museum's permanent exhibition. He headed the museum in the year 2015-2016. I invite you all to the opening lecture entitled Righteous and Merciful, the Ulma Family. Dr. Szpytma, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Father. I would like to thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words about the blessed Ulma family in such a wonderful and prestigious place as the Angelicum University, which was so close to the heart of the greatest of Poles, the Holy Pope John Paul II. As I have mentioned, I will talk about the family that was declared blessed by the Catholic Church less than 3 months ago. First of all, it is worth mentioning the place in the world which this family was associated with. It is, of course, Poland, and in it the village of Markowa. The Ulmas lived most of their lives in a free and independent Poland, which was reborn in 1918 after 123 years of partitions by Russia, Germany, and in the case of these lands, Austria. Poland as a sovereign state existed until 1939, when it was attacked and divided again by Germany and the Soviet Union. Here you can see the pre-war borders of Poland and the occupied Polish territory. In 1939, Markowa found itself close to the new German-Soviet border and was part of the general government, the German occupation zone, until 1944. After 1944, it became part of so-called Polish People's Republic. Markowa is marked here with a cross. Markowa is currently located in southeastern Poland, 60 kilometers from the border with Ukraine and 100 kilometers from the border with Slovakia. It's 300 kilometers from Warsaw and 200 kilometers from Krakow. Large towns and cities in the vicinity include Łańcut, Przeworsk, and Rzeszów. The village was founded in the mid-14th century under King Casimir the Great. The village was as large then as it is today. Since the 19th century, it has typically had a population of between 400 and 4,500, the vast majority of them farmers. Sources indicate that the Roman Catholic parish in Markowa was established as early as in 1354. Its founders were probably its then owners, the Pilecki family. Later it was administrated, among others, by the Lubomirski family from Przeworsk. Interestingly, the Lubomirskis were also associated with the Eternal City. The church of St. Stanislaus here contains, among other things, an inscription dedicated to Dorota Lubomirska, daughter of the owner of Markowa, who died in Rome in 1932. The first church in Markowa was wooden, but it was demolished in 1904, and then the neo-Gothic church depicted here was built, which still exists and which houses the relics of the blessed Ulma. In addition to 400 Catholics, there were also dozens of Seventh-day Adventists living in Markowa before World War II. Jews had also lived there since at least at the 19th century. In 1939, there were 107 of them. They did not live in a ghetto. This is the layout of their houses. They lived in more than 20 houses, of which 3 have survived to this day. You can see one of them containing a house of prayer in a contemporary photo. Let us move on to our main protagonists. In the photo, you can see a self-portrait of Józef Ulma, his life dates, and his handwriting. He came from a rural, traditional peasant's family, living off farm work, such as here. We see the planting of potatoes. However, he was definitely an extraordinary person, because in addition to farming, he was interested in gardening, horticulture, beekeeping. He was an amateur photographer, and he was the first in the village to use wind energy to light his house. And here we see the diploma he received from the breeding of silkworms and the diagrams of their lives. Despite having little formal education. He only completed 4 years of primary school because that was all that was available in the countryside at the time, and also a 6-month agricultural courses as an adult. He was a bibliophile. Around 300 books from his library have survived to this day. He was a religious man, committed to society from a young age. Here we see evidence of his affiliations to a Catholic organization. He was also associated with secular cooperative and political organizations, such as Polish Union of Village of Vichy. It is time to say a few words about the other hero. This is Wiktoria Ulma Niemczak. She was also born in Markowa. She went to school in Free Poland and she completed 7 grades because that was all the education available there at that time. Like her future husband, who was 12 years older, she was also socially involved. Among other things, she was a member of an amateur theater group and was involved initially with Catholic and then folk youth organizations. Here we see the theater group she was a part of. In 1935, Józef and Wiktoria got married. Here is a photograph from their wedding. The marriage was very well matched. As witnesses recalled, they lived a life of love. Its fruit were children. The first child, Stasia, was born a year and a week after the wedding. Thanks to the fact that Józef Ulma was a photographer, we have a unique collection of photographs of his entire family. Here are some examples. The following children were brought into the world regularly every 14-15 months. Stasia was followed by Basia, then Władziu, Franuś, Antoś, Marysia, and in the spring of 1944, another one was to be born. Józef Ulma also photographed farm work. Here in the foreground, we see his father during the harvest. He also took photographs of his neighbors. Here we see his Jewish neighbors. This photo shows that it was already the time of occupation. As we can see, the Star of David on women's arms. The Germans had been exterminating the Polish elite since 1939. In Markowa, the occupiers murdered some of the most important patriot activists, sending a large part of the population to slave labor in Germany and robbing the economy. But by far the hardest fate was suffered by those residents who were Jewish. Their property was seized, they were sent to ghettos, and from 1941 they were mass murdered. At that time, as you can see, it was ordered that those Poles who supported Jews would also be murdered. In Markowa, Germans began the mass extermination of Jews in 1942, deporting them to the extermination camp in Bełżec. However, most of them went into hiding because they knew that this was not a trip to work in the East. Out of the group of 54 Jews in hiding, 25 were found by the inhabitants of Markowa under penalty of death and delivered to the Germans who murdered them. 29 were hidden by residents of the same village. The largest group of 8 Jews, neighbors from Markowa, Lea Dittner with her daughter Reszla, Gouda Greenfeld, a merchant from Łańcut, Saul Goldman, and his 4 sons. We can see the 4 sons, Baruch, Mechel, Joachim, Mojżesz, whom we can see here were taken in by the Ulmas. What was the reason behind this decision? It is difficult for me as a historian to answer this with full responsibility. The Ulmas' life paths shows that they were no strangers to empathy towards the problems faced by their neighbors, and that they were also friends with Jews. There was also a Bible in their house in which the text with the passage about the merciful Samaritan was found underlined. This could be the answer to the question posed. However, the time of war is not only about mercy, but also about meanness. In this photo we can see, for example, the negotiations, material evidence of betrayal. It also affected the Ulmas. Someone, perhaps a local policeman from neighboring town, who had previously helped the same Jews and was supposed to keep their property, reported to the Germans that the Ulmas were hiding Jews. The crime was perpetrated on 24 March 1944 and involved more than a dozen officers led by commander of the occupying German gendarmerie Eilert Dieken. First they murdered the Jews, then the parents Joseph and Victoria, and finally all of the children aged 8 to 1.5 years old. As it turned out, during the exhumation, when a baby's head was noticed between the mother's legs, another 7th child of the Ulmas began to be born during the execution or already in the grave. It was never born, so we don't know its sex. After the murder and an alcoholic-fueled feast, the gendarmes ransacked the Ulmas' house and ordered the bodies to be buried near the house, forbidding burial in the cemetery. Towards the end of the war, the Polish underground shot a policeman from the local police force, which was subordinate to the Germans, a zealous collaborator of the Germans who probably denounced the Ulmas. Of the German gendarmes, only one was punished, Josef Kokot, who was hiding in Czechoslovakia. He was deported to Poland and sentenced to death in 1958, but the verdict was changed to 25 years imprisoned. He died in a Polish prison in 1980. I have searched for information on the fate of Eilert Dieken for many years. In 2011, I found a short reference on the internet that in 1953 he was involved in tender for the renovation of a police station in the town of Essen in the Federal Republic of Germany. We wrote a letter to this town asking for materials about him. In response, we received, among other things, a letter from his daughter, together with a photograph of her father from World War II, addressed the Ulma family, in which she expressed her joy at the interest in her father's story, as he was a good man and did a lot of good for people. When I met her in person in 2013, she did not want us to tell her what we knew about him. So we left the information in a sealed envelope. But she told us what she knew. We learned that he was a caring dad, that both before, during and after the war, he was a respected citizen and a German police officer. He died on his 62nd birthday in 1960. He never stood trial for his crimes, of which there were many. According to one Jewish account written many years after the war, in Markowa, after the crime against the Ulma family, the inhabitants were said to have murdered 24 Jews out of fear. It's not true. In fact, there are echoes of the search for the hiding Jews, which took place on German orders almost 2 years earlier. The villagers continued to hide 21 Jews in spite of great fear until July 1944, when the Soviets entered. There are the families that also gave shelter to Jews. This is a Schiller family. This is the Zwinner family, the two families of the name. This is a Drewniak family. And this is the Bar family. Józef and Victoria Ulma, but not their children, were awarded the Righteous Among the Nations medal in 1995. It is estimated that thanks to Poles, tens of thousands of Jews survived World War II. Around 1,000 Poles were murdered by the Germans for helping Jews. Returning to the Ulma family, in 2004, on the 60th anniversary of the crime, the inhabitants of Markowa founded this monument. I had the honor of chairing the building committee for this commemoration. And in 2016, Ulma Family Museum of Poles Saving Jews during World War II was opened in Markowa. It was built by the Voivodeship local government, and substantive support came from the Institute of National Remembrance, which is the leading institution in Poland dealing with this subject. We have published in IPM a number of publications on this subject, not only in Polish. In 2003, the beatification process of the Ulma family began, which ended on 10 September 2023 with the elevation of the entire family to the glory of the altars. Thank you for your attention, and I would like to encourage all those who would like to learn more about this story to visit the exhibitions of the Institute of National Remembrance, the Samaritans of Markowa, Death for Humanity. Read the book, The Righteous and the Merciful, and visit the website about the history of the Ulma family. And now I invite you to watch a short video made by the Institute of National Remembrance on the occasion of the beatification of the Ulma family. Thank you very much for your attention.
Ulma family from Markowa. The beatification of an entire family, including their unborn child, is an unprecedented event. The date assigned to the Ulma family on the liturgical calendar will be July 7th, Victoria and Joseph Ulma's wedding day, thus emphasizing the value family represents.
When Joseph and I met, we were both members of the local theater group. My husband supported me not only in everyday life, but also in gaining knowledge during the courses I attended at the Folk University. Joseph and I got married in 1935. We lived in a small house on the outskirts of Markowa. Our children were born soon after. Our home was always filled with warmth and love. And thanks to the children, it was full of life and laughter. Joseph was a man of many talents. He set up a fruit tree nursery in Markowa and was one of the first to grow fruit and vegetables in our village. My husband even built his own beehives and raised silkworms. Joseph was a jack of all trades. He constructed a bookbinding machine and a home wind turbine. And thanks to that, we became the first family in the village to light our house with electricity rather than a paraffin lamp. But Joseph's greatest passion was photography. At first, he used a self-assembled camera. He took pictures of our families and neighbors in Markowa. And my husband liked reading about all sorts of things. He was interested in everything from electrical engineering to everyday life in Australia. He was popular and well-loved among the community. Joseph often worked for the benefit of the village, too. He was involved in various social activities, such as being the chairman of the Agricultural Education Committee in the Polish Union of Village Youth. And his passion for books, it led him to become a librarian. And he was also the manager of the dairy cooperative in Markowa. Joseph was also a great patriot. And it was out of love for his homeland that he stood up to fight against German aggression in September 1939. Faith had always played an important role in our family life. It inspired us and gave us strength. It guided us in treating others with love and helping those in need.
With the outbreak of war in 1939, the reality of life in Poland changed drastically. The time of occupational terror aimed at the entire society began. In 1942, the Germans murdered most of the Jews in Markowa. Under the threat of death, Poles were forbidden to provide any form of help to the Jews in hiding. The Germans also forced people to participate in searches for hiding Jews. Despite the terrors, as many as 9 Polish families from Markowa continued to shelter Jews in their homes. One of them was the Ulma family. In the spring of 1944, one of the officers of the Blue Police, which was created by the Germans, informed his superiors from the German gendarmerie that the Ulmas were hiding Jews. In the morning of 24th March 1944, a group of German officers arrived at the Ulma family house. The hiding Jews, Saul Goldman and his sons, Baruch, Michael, Yachim, and Moshe, as well as Golda Grunfeld and Leah Dittner, with her little daughter Reshla, were shot first. The executioners then dragged Victoria and Joseph out of the house and shot them in front of their children. Eventually, the youngsters, Stasha, aged 8, Basha, 7, Vuajo, 6, Franek, 4, Antosh, 3, and Marisha, 1.5, were also killed. At the time of her death, Victoria was pregnant with her 7th child. That morning, the Germans had murdered 17 people. In 1995, Josef and Victoria Alma were honored with the Righteous Among the Nations Medal. In 2010, they were posthumously awarded the Commander's Cross of the Order of Polonia Restituta by President Lech Kaczynski, on the initiative of President Andrzej Duda. The day of the death of the Alma, Goldman, Grunfeld, and Didner families, 24th March, was established as the National Day of Remembrance of Poles who saved Jews under German occupation. Thanks to the work of the Institute of National Remembrance and the commitment of its staff, numerous educational and research projects devoted to the subject of the Holocaust and Poles saving Jews have been launched. These efforts also contributed to the founding of the Alma Family Museum in Markowa, where we can also learn many similar stories. It is immensely gratifying to see the beatification of this remarkable family, a symbol of humanity. This event will undoubtedly facilitate the dissemination of knowledge about people who sacrificed their lives to save others. The beatification process of the Alma family began in 2003. On 17 December 2022, Pope Francis approved the decree of their martyrdom, paving the way for their beatification. The ceremony took place on 10th September 2023 in Markowa. The Alma family joined the procession of martyrs, becoming a seed that yields a bountiful harvest. It is a harvest of hope in the final victory of good over evil, a model for future generations, a warning of what can happen when people are stripped of their dignity and when neither man-made law nor divine law is respected.
Dr. Spitma, thank you very much for your presentation once again. And now I'm pleased to introduce and give the floor to Dariusz Herbig, who will be the moderator of the panel discussion that follows the lecture we have just listened to. Tomasz Herbig is a doctor of philosophy, also graduated in theology and political science. He lectures at the University of Warsaw. He is editor-in-chief of the Yearbook of the History of Polish Philosophy, as well as a member of the editorial board of Political Theology. He specializes in the history of Polish and Russian philosophy, philosophy of politics and philosophy of religion, as well as biblical theology. Tomasz Herbig will share more about our special guest in the panel. Dr. Herbig, the floor is yours.
Maybe I'm going to stay here. So, thank you very much. And before I start our discussion, I would like to introduce our speakers. The first speaker is Sister Katrin Joseph-Drozd, and she is professor of theology. Sister Drozd is professor of theology at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas. She completed her doctoral studies in theology here at the Angelicum and several years later, after having served in various capacities in various Dominican schools, including Aquinas College in Tennessee. In the United States of America, she returned to Rome to teach. Since 2011, she has served as a professor of theology as well as vice dean and dean of the faculty. Professor Drozd's lectures include, among others, topics of moral theology, such as cardinal virtues, and their practical bearing on the Christian life or justice in relation to charity and other virtues. Sister Katrin Joseph is a member of the Dominican Sisters of the Congregation of St. Cecilia. So, thank you very much, and you're welcome. Our second panelist is Professor George Weigel. who is a Catholic philosopher and theologian. He is Distinguished Senior Fellow of Washington's Ethics and Public Policy Center. Professor Weigel is author of over 20 books. The first volume of his biography of Pope St. John Paul II, which title is Witness to Hope, was a New York Times bestseller, and his writing appears in a variety of publications, including the Wall Street Journal or First Things. In his most recent book entitled To Sanctify the World, The Vital Legacy of Vatican II, the Second Vatican Council, George Weigel explains the necessity of the Second Vatican Council and explores the continuing relevance of its teaching. So please, take your seat. And the third participant of our discussion, whom I just wanted to invite, is Mr. Kamil Kopera, who is a historian at Warsaw-based Witold Pilecki Institute of Solidarity and Valor. He is working on a project called by name, commemorating people who were, like the Ulma family, murdered by the Germans for helping Jews during the Holocaust. As a researcher, he is gathering information about such crimes across Poland, and what is also important to note is the fact that previously Mr. Kopera was a researcher at the Ulma Family Museum of Poles Saving Jews in World War II in Markowa. One of his main focuses was to shed light on the Jewish population of Markowa. He managed to discover identities of Jews who were in hiding with the Ulma family and reach to their relatives. During his work, he has initiated and co-organized lectures, meetings, and exhibitions about helping Jews during the war to facilitate better understanding of complicated Polish Jewish history. So, welcome, and I think that now I can start our discussion. Maybe if you want Dr. Spytma to take a seat with us. No? You don't know? Okay, so if you do not want, we can start without it. In the first part of our discussion, I would like us to briefly comment on the lecture which we all have just heard. But not only I would like us not only to briefly comment on this lecture, but I would also like to introduce some topics which I have prepared for today's discussion. First of all, I would like Sister Drozd to take the floor first, and I would like to ask you about such a thing. I wonder whether the case of the Ulma family falls within any moral order as we know it. To be more precise, or to formulate the question in a more specific way, I would like to formulate it in such a way. Is what we are confronted with in their martyrdom something that can be prescribed by any ethics or moral theory? Can such a high price for helping another human being, for the price is not only one's own death, but the death of an entire family, be considered in terms of moral obligation? So please, take the floor and briefly comment both on lecture and on this first topic, which I just wanted to introduce to our discussion.
Thank you, Tomasz, for a provoking question, let's just say. But first, for a comment on the presentation, I would like to thank the professor, because for myself, I am not terribly familiar with the Ulma family. I've seen a little bit on the website, but it was very enlightening to hear some of the points that were more specific that I had not been enlightened about. Even to the point of the fact, which will come into play, as to the baby almost being born at that moment, and also all the other families that were involved. So I think it is a very relevant, challenging argument that we see before us. Which leads me to the other challenging question. A moral obligation, I would say no, quite the opposite. But let me give a few arguments why. First of all, let's talk about natural law and some of the basic principles, first common principles we speak of, which are that we preserve our being, and that pertains to everything that exists. But for rational beings, it becomes a formal law that we are to preserve our life and the life of others. So that seems, this is why martyrdom is seen as so contradictory. It's so ridiculous to those who do not understand. So that would be my first point. However, we have to take it a step further, because then we have Christ's commandments, the greatest commandment, to love God and to love our neighbor as ourselves. And then we have Christ's counsel. No one has greater love than this, than to lay down one's life for a friend. So how are we to apply that and take that in connection with that first principle of preserving life? I would say that's our challenge. And the only way we can answer that is that Christ has given us something of this higher law of faith. He has conquered death. By death, he brings us to new life. And again, as we read in Matthew, those who lose their life for my sake will find it. But that still leaves the question of, could it be a command? Well, we are commanded to love our neighbor, but giving my life for my neighbor extends beyond that. So there's an extreme here. And I would argue that the only way that in general we are not required and commanded to give our life at every moment. We are to protect it. If someone comes right in here right now in this room, we are to try to protect our life. Yet some of us have the grace. And I would argue that martyrdom includes a special grace, the gift of fortitude. And we should not presume that we have that gift. The fathers of the church argued about this. There's some great stories, even Polycarp and his death. We have some great stories of the ancient fathers with this question. And so we are not obliged, and we should be careful of being presumptuous. But yet God may be calling us to give that greatest sacrifice of our life.
Okay.
Thank you.
So thank you very much for these remarks. And Professor George Weigel, in First Things, you published a text in which you commented, among other things, on the significance and meaning of the martyrdom of the Ulma family for the contemporary church. I would now like to reflect both on this issue and on how these and other examples well known to Karol Wojtyła of the martyrdom and sacrificial deaths of Poles in defense of Jews might have influenced his teaching during his pontificate. But I would like not only to ask about this thing, but I would also like to ask you about this remark formulated by Sister Catherine. What do you think about it? Can we be obliged in any moral sense to give our life in such a way in which it was given to the others by Ulma family?
Thank you. I want to begin by thanking Professor Spitma for his presentation, but also for his work at IPN, which is really one of the foremost research institutions in the world right now, and for his work in creating the Ulma Museum of Poles Rescuing Jews in Markowa, which I had the pleasure and honor of visiting, excuse me, for several hours in late July. The museum is exceptionally well done. I have told people all over the world that whatever else Poland is getting right or wrong these days, Poles have conquered the creation of the modern historical museum. And this is, I mean, whether it's in Warsaw or Wadowice or Krakow or wherever, these are magnificent expressions of creativity in museum making, and the Markowa Museum is one of those. Several things occurred to me in reflecting on the questions that we were presented and in listening to a story I've come to know rather well over the past several years. The first is that while anti-Semitism is a disease that has existed for centuries, what is sometimes called today exterminationist anti-Semitism is a distinctive product of the political madnesses of the mid-20th century. It took a particularly lethal form in the Nazi so-called final solution to the so-called Jewish question. But as we meet here today, I cannot help but note the fact that exterminationist anti-Semitism continues today and was on brutal and revolting display just a month ago in the Hamas pogrom of October 7th. This is not a problem in the past. It's a problem today. And as always, anti-Semitism, and particularly this exterminationist version of anti-Semitism, which is not a matter of prejudice, it's a matter of extermination, is a sign of a deep sickness in any society. In Markova this summer, I was struck by what I would call the embeddedness of the Ulma family in their region, its life, and its customs. These were people who were the product of a particular time and place and sensibility. And that's important to note because in a lot of the secular world, the theory of the Frankfurt School sociologist Theodor Adorno in the influential book, The Altruistic Personality, is still dominant. And as many of you know, Adorno claimed that particular commitments impede, get in the way of a universal sensibility and the apprehension of universal values. Altruism, he suggested, is the product of a transcending of particular commitments, particularly moral commitments. I sometimes think that the Adorno theory reminds me of the cartoon Peanuts in the United States, which some of you may know, in which one of the characters says, "I love humanity, it's people I can't stand." There's something obviously wrong about this Adorno theory, that the altruistic personality is one that has transcended particular commitments. And the Ulmas demonstrate that. The Ulmas falsify this because their altruism was the expression of a very particular set of commitments, including, as Professor Spitma and the little film showed, the Catholic commitment formed in large part by the parable of the Good Samaritan. And the noting of that and the research on the Ulmas, the underlining of that parable in their family Bible demonstrates that. Finally, on the question of this extraordinary familial experience, and indeed the experience of Poles rescuing Jews throughout the Second World War and John Paul II and martyrdom, I have to think back to the early 1980s and the canonization of St. Maximilian Kolbe, where, as you remember, some of you will remember, others hopefully will have read about this, there was a great argument about whether Kolbe should be canonized as a confessor or as a martyr. And the general view in the Roman Curia and elsewhere was that while he was certainly a confessor, there was no evidence that he was killed in odium fidei, the traditional definition of martyrdom, in hatred of the faith, when he volunteered to take another prisoner's place in the starvation bunker at Auschwitz. There was no sense that he was singled out because he was a Catholic priest. And yet John Paul II, I think quite rightly, insisted that Father Kolbe be canonized as a martyr, because I think the Pope understood that systematic odium fidei of the type manifested by Nazis or communists or whatever was a systematic odium fidei leads to systematic odium hominis, a systematic hatred of the human person as one created with innate dignity and infinite value. The Ulmas died because of systematic odium hominis, and therefore they too, I think, are rightly understood as martyrs. And this expansion of the notion of martyrdom seems to me to be a useful one as we wrestle with the particularly wicked forms of political malice that have characterized the past century and a quarter.
Okay, thank you very much. And I would also like to ask you one more, Professor Weigel, short question. Do you think that this example, the example of Ulma family and other such examples well known to Karol Wojtyła as Paul, may have influenced his teaching on Jews matters, on the attitude towards Catholics and Jews?
Well, we have to remember that Karol Wojtyła grew up in a town that was 20% Jewish, that had a long tradition of tolerance among the various religious communities. Many of his best friends were Jews, and many of them died in the Shoah, in the Holocaust of European Jewry. So he was personally sensitized to the agony of modern Jewry in a unique way. He knew this in his bones, and he knew that a new relationship had to be created between the peoples of the covenants in order that both might be a light to the nations. And that was why, for example, he insisted on a visit to the Synagogue of Rome, where he described the Jewish people as our elder brothers in faith. That was the root of his remarkable friendship with the chief rabbi of Rome, Elio Toaff, who was one of the only two people John Paul II mentioned in his testament, in his will. It was Monsignor, then Archbishop Jewish, and Rabbi Toaff. As Sister Catherine has known and taught for many, many years, John Paul II thought of faith and reason as the two wings on which the human spirit rises to the contemplation of the truth. I think he thought of Christians and Jews as the two peoples of the book who together must be a light to the nations, who live in a lot of darkness, as we have seen very much in the past 6 weeks.
Okay. Thank you very much. So I would like now to ask a question to Mr. Kopera. How could we look at the analyzed example of the Ulma family from a historical perspective? You are a historian, and I would like to ask you, you are a historian who also researched this topic, investigated this topic at Markowa. Was the heroism that emerges in it something common in occupied Poland? We know that it was common for this village, yes, for Markowa, but what is common in occupied Poland, and how should it be positioned against other attitudes? Please answer this question.
So it is very hard to say that heroism is a common thing. So heroes are always in minority in society. During the war, first of all, we have to remember that helping Jews, it was a process, a very long process. From the perspective of region of Markowa, the expulsion of Jews started there in August 1942. Ulma family was murdered 2 years later. So many people in Markowa and in the region started to help Jewish people in August 42. And then they were scared to help them for a bit more time, and they decided to show them another place to live, another way to look for help. For example, and we got, of course, other people in the region of Markowa, in the region of Łańcut, Jarosław, neighboring cities, who were killed for sheltering Jews. We have to, I have to tell a story about one of that kind of person. Her name was Aniela Niezioł. She was killed just 3 weeks after the German forced the Jewish people to leave their home in the neighboring city of Łańcut. It was in end of August 1942. So people in Markowa, Ulma family, other people in Markowa, know very well that hiding Jews can end in death of the people who were saving Jews as well as family, because in this, not only Aniela Nizioł was killed, but other people in area was killed also. We have to remember that not only helping Jews by sheltering them, like the Ulma family did, was punishable by death. For example, like 100 kilometers away from Markowa, a man named Jan Janton was killed because he was just giving food to the Jewish people who were hiding in the forest. Germans just set an ambush, killed the Jewish people who were in the forest shelter, and find out that this man is giving them food, so he is supporting Jewish people. He was killed because of it. So this heroism got many faces, and referring to the second part of these questions, sometimes people who were hiding Jews, who were helping Jews, switched to the other side, we can say. The best example of this is the navy blue policeman mentioned by Dr. Szpytma, named Włodzimierz Leś. We think that he was the man who was giving shelter to the Goldman family, and he rejected them, he forced them to leave their home, his home, and then he informed German authorities that those men are in hiding in the Ulma family in Markowa. So sometimes we got people who were switching kind of sides. Even righteous among the nations, recognized by Yad Vashem, sometimes were accused about crimes against the Jewish people. For example, man named Eugeniusz Niedziela, who lived like 60 kilometers away from Markowa, he hid 8 Jewish people in his basement for more than a year, and in the same time he was blackmailed by his neighbor. So this neighbor just forced Eugeniusz Niedziela to participate in crime against other Jewish people. This blackmail was very simple. If Niedziela rejects to participate in this crime, this man, his neighbor, will turn Niedziela to authorities because of the sheltering this group of Jewish people which Niedziela had in hiding. So it's very, very hard to tell numbers, to tell if there were more people who were trying to save Jews, help Jews, or of course who try to actively work against Jews. But we have to remember that one man who is working actively with Germans against Jews, against Poles, could lead to the many, many deaths. For example, man who turned Aniela Nizioł, he was a Polish citizen, but he signed a German national list, so-called Volksliste, and he was responsible for death around 50 people because he was working together with Germans. Most of those people were Jewish people from Mainzut. At the end of the war, at the end of the occupation, this man was killed by Polish underground, as well as Włodzimierz Leś involved in the case of the Ulma family. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sister Catherine, I would like to ask about one more thing which is connected with your remark with which we have started this discussion. While asking my questions, whether we can be obliged in any moral sense, by any moral theory or any ethical theory, to sacrifice our life in a sense, in a way in which it was sacrificed by Ulmas the life of our entire family. You have mentioned about this crucial confusion, about this fundamental confusion between the natural law, which tells us to preserve our lives, and with the words of Christ, who tells us that this is the highest level of love, the highest example of love, to give our life for the others. And now I would like to ask one more thing. What do you think, with what, in a moral, but I think that in some way also transgressing moral level, are we confronted in this example of Ulma family? Are we confronted here, for example, with an epiphany of God, in a sense in which, of course, the parable of Good Samaritan is also a kind of an epiphany of God and his charity? So please, his love.
I'm going to reference right away Thomas Aquinas on what he says martyrdom is. Well, excuse me, George.
Surprise, sister talks about Thomas Aquinas.
Well, only because, as you say, you know, this question of love. Martyrdom is about love, which is why people can't understand it, because they think love is to preserve my life or those I love at whatever degree possible. And yet, how can I give up my life, even someone I love? And it's only because of the love of Christ. Thomas says, martyrdom is the greatest proof of the perfection of charity. So what do you see, which has already been spoken about, as in the Good Samaritan? They gave their life for love, and not only for love of their family, for love of their neighbor. How radical is that? But as I say, I still go back to, we have to be very careful of presuming that we have the grace because it is so difficult, because of that natural law. And how we have to prepare ourselves for martyrdom. Just as if we have to persevere in our faith until death in whatever form, but especially for martyrdom, because it won't happen in a moment. I will have this great strength if I don't show it in little ways throughout my life, which is what I think we see in this family. We see the preparation for that heroic moment in their day-to-day living as a normal family, loving one another and loving their neighbor.
So it is the matter of permanent preparation for this moment, yes?
Yes.
Okay, and I would also like to ask one more question. How do you understand the significance and the meaning of this decision to also beatify the Ulma's unborn child? How do you interpret this decision? How should we see its deepest sense, please? Professor Weigel.
It makes perfect sense, I think, from a Catholic understanding that birth is a dramatic but a moment in the continuum of a life, which begins at conception and ends at natural death. So that unborn child was a human being for 8-9 months. The question of whether that child could be considered a martyr is an interesting one. Probably not. But that she was a human person is indisputable from both a biological and Catholic theological point of view. So I think it's a reaffirmation of the Church's settled teaching on human life begins at conception. Could I make just one other point in response to something Sister Catherine said, put me in mind of this? I think there are two other things to remember about the situation of Jews during German National Socialism. Something that Professor Capera was well. There weren't a lot of heroes, and that includes Western governments. I mean, there's a tendency to lay all of the blame for this on certain nationalities. But the United States government had strict immigration quotas that could have been lifted to permit Jews to leave Germany, particularly after Kristallnacht in 1938. The British government was the same way. It was not exterminationist anti-Semitism, but it was anti-Semitism that fueled this refusal to look at what, in fact, anybody who was paying attention knew was happening, if not after the passage of the Nuremberg laws, then certainly after Kristallnacht. So the examination of conscience needs to be much broader than in the places where the Holocaust actually was effected. And I think that the lesson for that for us today is one that's a difficult one, but has to be faced, particularly in post-totalitarian regimes. I mean, after you get rid of the totalitarian regime, how do you build a decent society? Well, one of the things you have to come to grips with is that the success of a totalitarian regime requires a critical mass of acquiescence on the part of people. There have to be enough people not willing to say no for these systems to survive. Germany was forced to confront that by the Allies after the Second World War. And Germany is a different place today because of that. Russia was not forced to confront that after the collapse of the Soviet Union. And you now have 70% of the Russian people perfectly happy, or seemingly perfectly happy, according to the polling data, to support a genocidal war against Ukraine. There's a connection there somewhere. But we also, as the encroachments of state power in all of our societies become greater and greater, we have to be aware of our responsibility to push back against those encroachments, especially when they touch on the dignity and value of every human life.
Okay, thank you. And also, only one more question about this beatify unborn child. Should we understand it, Sister Catherine, in such a way that this child participated in a fate of their parents? Or shouldn't we understand in such a traditional way, for example, baptizing young children, yes?
Yeah, I believe, and as Professor Weigel had just noted, the question of certainly the dignity of life, but we do have a couple of issues that do arise, and it is the freedom, which applies not only to the unborn child, but also to the younger siblings, because they are also before the age of reason, so before the full exercise of the will. So you could apply, once you have the dignity of life question as to the unborn child, you still run into the same issue with those younger children as to the freedom. Also, but with the unborn child, you have the question of the lack of baptism. Whereas the other siblings were baptized, at least you have something of the faith that has already been passed on. So I would say those are two of the objections that would arise there. What comes to my mind immediately is the Holy Innocents, because we do have a tradition in the church of those who were unbaptized, who did not even know Christ, who were before even the possibility, who in some way testified to Christ by the grace of God. Now, I'm not saying we would use that. I'm using that as an analogy in this case. It's not the same, because it is definitely a particular situation as to them being killed in the place of the Christ child. But it does come into play. Also, I would say, as you noted, the question of the parent's faith. Since the child would have been baptized, but that's very much a speculation, but still something of that could be part of the argument to defend Pope Francis's decision, I would say. Because, again, as George Weigel had noted, the odium fidei is one, but one of the other elements for being declared a martyr is that one does testify to the faith, which is the meaning of the word martyr. So how does that child testify? I think we would still have to come back to something of a baptism by blood. And so I would tie those different elements together to come up with something of a substantial, I think they would be the key elements for the argument.
So thank you very much. Just before starting our Q&A session, I'm going to ask you, our audience, to take the floor and ask your questions. I'm just going to ask one more question to Mr. Kopera. I wanted to ask you about the project Called by Name, which is conducted by Witold Pilecki Institute in Warsaw. How do you understand the contemporary significance of such attempts to commemorate people who were helping Jews or other people that you are commemorating, other than Ulma family that you are commemorating in this project? What is the contemporary today's significance of such projects? How do you understand it?
So we are trying to rebuild a memory about those people who get killed because of sheltering Jews or giving them help in the very place where those people lived. So people killed by the Germans for giving help to the Jewish people were very often just forgotten by their own communities. Ulma family is very unique in Markowa case is very unique. But in other cases, other villages, other little towns, people got no idea that someone in their own village, town, were sheltering Jews and got killed by the Germans because of this. So we are reaching to the families of people who were helping Jews, who were killed, who got killed because of this, as well as we are reaching to the families of the Jewish people who went into hiding, who were actively fighting to survive during the war, and we are trying to recreate some kind of bond, because we know that in the pre-war time and in the wartime there was a strong bond between Jewish people and Polish people who give shelter to the Jewish neighbors. We are organizing lectures, we are organizing educational projects around these histories, these very particular histories, to tell the people what happened in these villages, cities. And we are going with some kind of message to the younger generation that it cannot be that someone could be punished for helping other human being, that death for humanity cannot be repeated in future. So we are trying to bring past and the future together, and the stories of the people killed because of sheltering other people, because of helping other people, is for us some kind of link between past and the future.
So thank you very much. We can now start our Q&A session. If anyone wants to ask a question or just to express his point of view, his or her point of view or opinion, you can now do this. I think that there is the first question.
Thank you very much. So, in full trust in the Catholic magisterium in its teaching about the Blessed Ulma family, I do want to ask a few questions about how we came to know the saintliness of this family, because from what I've seen in the first lecture and also afterwards, it isn't quite clear to me how we came to the conclusion that this family had an extraordinary virtue or even a supernatural charity, so to say. So first of all, like, social engagement in a Catholic social society would not by itself, to me, signify extraordinary saintliness, nor underlining something in the Bible, which is not a very uncommon act. And nor even would I say that death because of a charitable act would by itself suffice to to saintliness, because many people in the Second World War died because of their involvement with partisan activities or even sheltering Jews, of whom we say in no way that they're saints, because they might have been communists or atheists or we don't know. So there's no way that these people lived their death with a Christian charity. And they might, for all we know, well, we know because they've been canonized, but they might have died in despair, you know. It might have been that they were begging on their knees not to die at the last moment, and so on and so on. And then the older children, so perhaps the children before the age of reason, the older children, how do we know that they were not just following along the orders of their parents grudgingly? They might have. So how do we know these things? Do we have any spiritual writings? Do we have witnesses of their deaths? I'm wondering about this.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think Professor Spitman needs to get into this at a certain point, but I mean, I will say at the beginning that context is terribly important here. These were people who knew, because it was widely broadcast all over the country, that if you sheltered Jews, you would be killed. Okay? So the very willingness to do that is an expression, it seems to me, of an extraordinary exercise of the cardinal virtue of fortitude or courage. So that's point one. Okay, then you get to the question of what was the motivation for exercising the virtue of fortitude or courage in a heroic way, and that's why we should not, downplay the importance of that single citation of the Good Samaritan parable in the family Bible that identifies a motive for exercising the heroic virtue of charity. I just might mention one other thing. I don't know that this rises to the level of heroic exercise of the theological virtue of charity. But I was powerfully struck in Markova this summer at the degree to which these sheltered people were integrated into the family life of the Olmas, which we know from the photographs. And that in itself, in those contextual circumstances, and of course we're now bid to do theology contextually, seems to me to suggest an exceptional, if not heroic, exercise of the virtue of charity, understood as the love of neighbor for the love of God.
Thank you very much. You wanted
the professor needs to step in. I will just add one little point before you do, because you need to address the historical elements. What you brought up is actually the third point that's required for a declaration, though. We've mentioned odium fide, the testifying to the faith, but it also has to be done in a religious sense, in the spiritual sense. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Professor, because he has that answer more clearly than anyone.
As you can hear, my English is not so good to tell much words, and maybe we will translate. I will be better say in Polish. To jest tak, że rzeczywiście jest wiele rodzin, które zginęło za pomoc Żydom, ale w tym przypadku, tak jak powiedział profesor Weigel, znamy bardzo dobrze życie tych ludzi, mówię Ulmów.
There are indeed many Polish families that died because of sheltering Jews, but as Professor Weigel has told us, we know very well how this family lived with these Jewish people that they're sheltered.
Znamy ich odniesienia nie tylko do, jakie były ich relacje rodzinne, ale w stosunku do do krewnych, w stosunku do bliskich, do rodzin, ale także i do Żydów przed wojną. I można z tego w bardzo prosty sposób wnioskować, że to, co zrobili w czasie wojny, to zdecydowali się na ukrywanie Żydów, też było konsekwencją ich takiego pięknego, jakbyśmy powiedzieli dzisiaj, życia zgodnie z zasadami Ewangelii.
We know the relations that they had not only with their families but also with Jewish people before the Second World War, and what we can notice is that what they did in 1944, okay, jakoś, I have zaćmienia umysłu. What they did in 1944 is that is a consequence of their past life, is a consequence of the decision to live in a light of the gospel.
Do tego jeszcze dochodzi to, że wiemy, że ich wiara też nie była płytka, już to nie było na to czasu powiedzieć, ale z racji jego zaangażowania Józefa Ulmy w Związek Młodzieży Wiejskiej Wici, on nie był w najlepszych relacjach z jednym z proboszczów z Markowie, ale to nie powodowało jego odejścia od wiary. On był cały czas praktykującym chrześcijaninem, mimo że w pewnym okresie swojego życia był w nie najlepszych, jak wspomniałem, relacje z proboszczem.
Although we also know that Józef Ulma, who was a member of the Polish organization Vichy, was in not good relations with the priest in Markowa, but it didn't affect it. And what it didn't affect?
Nie miało to związku z jego praktykami religijnymi i wiarą.
It didn't have any relation to his practice of faith.
I jeszcze popatrzymy na to Biblię, która została, te dzieje biblijne, ta książka, która jest z tym podkreśleniem o miłosiernym Samarytaninie, która wyszła prawdopodobnie spod ręki Józefa lub Wiktorii, to też jest, był ważny element w procesie beatyfikacyjnym.
Of course, this Bible, which you have seen on the photography, was also an important element in the process of beatification.
Jeszcze na koniec powiem też, że to jest tak, że każdy ma rzadko się spotyka człowieka, który nie miałby wrogów albo który nie miałby osób, które o nim coś złego powiedzą.
And of course, we can rarely or maybe never meet a person about whom nothing bad can be said by whoever.
Moje badania na temat rodziny Ulmów, nie tylko moje, ale wielu osób, które się tym interesowało, pokazują, że oni mieli generalnie byli bardzo pozytywnie oceniani jako rodzina, jako ludzie też potrzebujący, udzielający pomocy innym, i to nawet przez te osoby, bo były takie, nieliczne, ale były, które uważały, że Ulmowie nie powinni ratować Żydów z racji tego, że mieli tak wiele dzieci. A mimo to te osoby również mówiły, że to byli jednak wyjątkowo dobrzy ludzie.
My researchers on the case of Ulma family showed that they were the opinion about them was very positive. The opinions about them were very positive, and that they were seen as people that are helping each other. And although there were some people that thought that it was something bad to shelter Jews, this opinion wasn't, I think, the one that nie wiem, jak to dobrze oddać. Że ta opinia na temat, jaki był sens, że ta opinia na temat, że nie powinni ratować Żydów, że ona nie miała?
Było kilka głosów, że nie powinni ratować Żydów z racji swojej licznej rodziny, ale nawet ci bardzo pozytywnie się o nich wyrażali.
But even, yes, okay, so this is why I've lost the meaning. But even these people were thinking about them and formulating their opinion about them in a very positive way. Their opinions about them were very positive. Even though people that thought that they shouldn't do this, they shouldn't shelter Jews.
A mnie to też bardzo interesowało właśnie ta kwestia, dlatego że może to nie wybrzmiało, że ja też pochodzę z tej miejscowości z Markowej, tam mieszkałem przez pierwsze 20 lat swojego życia i też jestem jakby z tej rodziny, bo moja babcia była siostrą Wiktorii. Mnie bardzo właśnie to interesowało, jacy oni byli przed wojną, jaką oni mieli opinię.
Because I came from this village, I was very interested in what was the opinion about them before the Second World War. Thank you very much. So there are more questions, please, if you can ask them.
So in light of what we talked about so far, I think Pope Francis has mentioned something like this in the past. Would it be better maybe for the Church to create a new category for sanctified people, specifically for this Bible verse of giving one's life for another? Since it seems that, like, you know, it's clearly in the Scriptures that this is a holy thing to do, and that maybe this would help to have a clear distinction between martyrs and these people that give their lives for others.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Pope Francis had spoken on that, and there hasn't been any formal declaration as to a new category, because we've had the confessors as well. But in this case also, because I was reflecting back on the initial question too, where you had asked about the children. So one question would be, yes, a separate category, yet here you have some of the elements of martyrdom, but you do, and you definitely have giving up your life for another, but even there the children question arises again. So even the separate category does not help as much there. And I think with the parents, we don't have as much of a problem even saying martyrdom. So I think the question is more those younger children. But perhaps here we could look at, again, something new, and the reinforcement that Pope Francis is trying to state, which also previous popes as well, the unity of the family and a participation of the children in the parents' act, because they were killed with that intention. Now, you still have to deal with the intention of the children, that's true, and so that is a problem, which I've raised already. But you still have a participation by their very act of being a member of that family. They were killed for the act of the parents. And since they were minors, the same way the parents would be responsible for them for any sin, there is some way that the children participate in that act of their parents by being born to those parents in that way. Now, it's not the strongest argument, but I think it is something for us to reflect on, and I think it is something that Pope Francis is considering.
Mm-hmm. At the time of the Kolbe debate, there was a question of a kind of hybrid called martyr of charity.
Yes.
That would cover these circumstances. And it was an interesting parallel to Kolbe in recent American history. A Navy SEAL named Michael Monsoor, who was posthumously awarded the Medal of Honor, the highest U.S. military award, who was a very devout Catholic indeed, and who gave his life by throwing himself on a grenade to protect the other people in his squad in Iraq. Now, that's not martyrdom, but it is a heroic exercise of the virtue of charity. So, you know, there's lots of room for discussion and whatnot right now. Father Vincent Capodanno, American Maryknoll priest who was a Marine chaplain during Vietnam, whose beatification cause is underway right now and is being pressed very strongly by our Archdiocese for the Military Services, died while saving men under fire. He was killed. Now that's not, you know, odium fidei, but it is a heroic act of charity. I suspect if Father Capodanno is beatified, it will be as a confessor. But there are these other things that are a little bit more in an unsorted out gray area, if you will, of thinking about these things.
Okay, we have got more questions, please.
Just a comment. Thank you, Sister Catherine, because that's what I was thinking about the children, is that you couldn't be hiding Jews in a large family without the children being part of it in some way, understanding it, being told not to speak, and many other things probably, and helping them, befriending them. So that's just beautiful to think about. But just a comment, actually, which is, I don't know, but I suspect that the father was a most unique person, and the mother. I mean, the father had, and it has nothing to do with the theology of this, but of the humanity of this. He had such an expansive love of so many dimensions of life, and was a reader, although he had a third-grade education, was fascinated by so many things, and so engaged in being alive that he knew the value of life, and that somehow allowed him to die for the lives of others, or something to that effect, in my sense of who he is, maybe.
Yes, and I think that it is very important. Maybe you want Mr. Kupera to answer this question, but I think that it was clearly showed in the lecture conducted by Dr. Spytma. If somebody, for example, makes photographies in these times, it of course also means something. Yes, that he tried to show the beauty of life. Yes, around him.
So, of course, he was a unique person. He was very well known because of this. And I think that those virtues he got from his own house, from the home of his parents. Because we have to remember that this lasting, this very long-term relation between Poles and Jews in Markowa can be dated in the 19th century, and we got pictures of father of the Józef Ulma, Marcin, who is reading books in the garden in early 40s. So Józef probably got this love for the books, for the knowledge from the very child time. And I want to address one more thing that we are focusing, of course, of the Ulma family. But we have to think about Jewish people who are in hiding, of course, because they lived side by side, and we got nearly no knowledge what those people were involved to, because they all perished during the Holocaust, and we got just little snippets because of the relation of the survivors, what happened in Markowa, and those people in hiding, for example, Saul Goldman. He was in the age of Józef Olma's father. So those people were also kind of well-known, well-educated, and they somehow influenced the life of the previous generation of the Józef father. So the story of the Ulma family, the story of the Markowa, got a lot of elements that we need to cover and to take a full picture of the whole situation, wartime situation. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any more questions?
So in this circumstance, if a Catholic family were to choose to not host Jews at the time, I guess under the thought that they would want to protect their children and family from death, would that be seen as less charitable or selfish in the eyes of the Catholic Church?
I'm presuming you're asking me. He's taking
So.
I don't think we have to speak of selfishness here. As I say, I think we're talking about grace. We're talking about definitely living in charity. But there's also a question of prudence, even if you go back to Maximilian Kolbe. The man who is supposed to die cries out, "My wife and my children." Now, does that mean he was not a good Catholic? Or a good Jew, actually? I don't remember, he was Catholic, that's right, he was Catholic, because I met him actually when I was here with Maximilian Kolbe's canonization. But he also knew his responsibilities, whereas Maximilian Kolbe as a priest had a freedom to say, I will die for this man. Now, I could say both had grace. So it is a great charity to die and to give one's life, but we also have to live our life prudently and try to discern what is God calling me to do in this moment. We've seen this in so many different genocides throughout the world, throughout even recently, of gods and men. Many of you have seen that, or we can talk about Rwanda. And you have some who have died and some who have not. We had the missionaries of charity. You know, one of the sisters survived. Was she not worthy, or was she not as charitable as the others who died? No. Here we have to look at the individual soul before God, living that faith, and some of us will be called to the bloody martyrdom, but we're all called to the white martyrdom. That we can be sure.
I think in those circumstances, it's really it certainly involves a question of motivation for not deciding to shelter.
Yes.
I mean, if I decide I'm not going to shelter Jews because Jews are Untermenschen, or I'm an anti-Semite and these are the people who killed Christ or whatever.
Yes.
Then you got a problem. If on the other hand you understand you're caught in a terrible dilemma, in which you've got a choice of bad choices here, that's a different circumstance. But as I think everyone has indicated here, these are not questions that are posed to people and you get 3 weeks to think about it. Or you go to your Summa and look up the references. I mean, you're going to make a decision right on the spot. Kolbe made a decision right on the spot. I don't think the Ulmas had a small group discussion or a conversation in the spirit to decide what they ought to do here. They just decided. That comes out of a life of preparation, and particularly prayer preparation and sacramental preparation. I mean, in that sense, this is a Eucharistic sacrifice and a Eucharistically informed sacrifice.
So I think that we've got one more question. Yes. Please, the floor is now yours.
Yes, I just wanted to ask Mr. Reigel, Professor Reigel, you mentioned that odium fidei can become, or is a cause of odium humanitatis, odium against humanity.
Right.
So I'm wondering, when you have this problem with aborted children, do you think that could be applied in some way that because the theory of limbo is not as popular as it used to be, and so could we possibly say that these aborted children, I mean, granted there's a difference between this family, which because the child was from a family that was Catholic, but if you can extend odium fidei to odium against humanity, can these aborted children be considered to be, in a sense, martyrs and perhaps baptism by blood or something like this? Could they be included in this?
I don't think so. I mean, the decision to abort a pregnancy is often made not in against some universal horizon of hatred of humanity, but because a woman feels trapped. She's been abandoned by the father of the child. She feels terrible economic pressures, whatever. My friend Frederica Matthews Green, an Anglican clergy person, a fierce pro-lifer in the United States, has often said that a woman in an unplanned and unwanted pregnancy is like an animal with its foot in a trap. The question is, how do you get the trap off? And sometimes the animal is willing to bite its leg off to do that. So I don't, now what I would say is that a society which accepts these extraordinary rates of abortion throughout the world has coarsened itself to the point where it's going to find it very difficult to exhibit ordinary charity, much less the heroic exercise of charity. And I think you see the effects of this in the coarsening of life throughout the Western world. Pardon me for holding my hands up, but I'm being blinded by not the Shekinah, but by the light there. The coarsening of life throughout the Western world has to be related to this appalling tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of abortions. And you see that in China. I had a student this summer in my program in Krakow, brilliant young Chinese woman who had been raised in a fairly well-to-do family in Shanghai, had gone to Notre Dame University in the United States, not because it was a Catholic university, because it was a prestigious American university. This is a good ticket punch for her future life. She had a profound conversion experience at Notre Dame, profound conversion experience, and is now a real evangelist in her life as a filmmaker. But she told me that her mother had told her, with a perfect, without any sense of remorse or regret or whatnot, that she was actually the middle of 3 children, the first and third of which had been aborted because they were inconvenient at that moment in this professional family's life. You multiply that by the number of abortions in China under the one-child policy, and you've got a very, very serious problem of, I don't know what you would call it, social psychology or something, but a great, great coarsening of the human spirit.
Can I just ask you, I'm sorry, because one more quick question, Sister, because this has been kind of spurred by what you said also ahead before. You mentioned that we have to, the self-preservation is very, very strong. It's a very primary desire to save one's life. But also you said, we should have a desire to save the life of others. But in this case, these parents were risking the life of their children. Wasn't there a greater obligation to save the lives of their children than the lives of these Jews? I mean, in the case of St. Maximilian Kolbe, he's the only one that paid the price. Whereas if this man had died, his family would have been affected as well. Maybe St. Maximilian saw this in that way. If I die, it's just me. But this man dies, his whole family is affected.
I would like also to add one more remark. It is also the difference not only between Father Kolbe and Ulma family, but also between Good Samaritan and Ulma family. The cost of Good Samaritan the cost of the Good Samaritan also didn't sacrifice. They sacrificed the entire family. Yes, his entire family. And there's also the difference between this parable of Good Samaritan and between Ulma family, not only between Kolbe and Ulma's.
I think if you had asked Mr. Ulma if he was concerned about his family and if he was taking every precaution, I think he would have said yes. Does that mean there was still a risk involved? Yes. But in that particular situation where there were going to be other lives that were taken unjustly, he did make a risk, yes, and he had to pray about it, discern. So it wasn't that he was putting his children in an absolute immediate risk, but yes, there was a risk. But why did he do that? Because there were others who were going to die, and there was a possibility that he could save his children and save others. So he definitely had to weigh all of those factors out. And certain people, as has already been noted, may not have done it, but he had determined that he could do it and that it was what God was calling him to do, and his family.
And perhaps because he discerned in the course of that discernment that there was an equivalent risk or a different kind of risk in not doing it, and in not exemplifying in life what he and Victoria were trying to teach the kids catechetically.
We have to end, I think. Is it going to be a short question? Okay, so the last one, okay? Can we, Father Cesare? Okay, the last question, and we are just going to end.
Yes, I would like maybe notice the context of these questions we are talking about this evening. First of all, about laws in occupied Poland, it was very unique, because if somebody was helping or sheltering Jews in Netherlands or France, maybe he paid a ticket, or he was arrested for a few weeks and not more. In Poland, this drastic laws was introduced gradually, starting for punishment, strong punishment for sheltering, then helping, and then it was only in Poland and occupied Poland. And then even if somebody was not informing about the knowledge he had, and the last was local leaders were obliged to inform and to know about these facts. If somebody was arrested and killed in place because sheltering or helping Jews, so local leader was also punished because he should know about this. And without giving information to the Germans about this, was already punished. And second context is ecclesiastical. First of all, about system. Nazi socialism was condemned by the Catholic Church together with Bolshevik communism as the godless systems. So for the Catholics, it was forbidden to be the member of Nazi party or the Communist party. And it was already declared in the 30s. And when we are talking about the canonization beatification processes, and it was a few decades ago, it was defined that the people murdered, killed under Nazi German system or Soviet or any other communist system, it was quite automatically declared as the in odium fidei, because one of the main purposes and goals of the system was to fight with Catholicism, with Christianity. So somebody killed by the system also, some organs of security system in occupied Poland or and other territories of Nazi or Soviet. It was already once declared as the odium fidei, so in this case was not doubt about the motivation of all this action to exterminate Jews or and other nations occupied by Nazi Germany or Soviet Russia.
So thank you. Does anyone want to comment on this?
I just want to say, just a brief comment about the responsibility of the people who are in charge of the villages. I was working on the case of the mayor of some village near the Warsaw, and for the 80 years, his family got no idea what happened and why he was killed by the Germans. To make a long story short, Polish farm, 2 people hiding 8 Jewish people. Germans find out what happened. They took 2 Polish people, Polish couple, to the gendarmerie post in the city. They were put in the front of the German kind of justice, as well as mayor of the village and his wife. The reason for the trial against the mayor of the village was because he was not informed the German authorities that those people are hiding Jews. In effect, the mayor was killed, those 2 people who were giving the shelter to the Jews, but the wife of the mayor was released because those people who were actually helping Jews asked the German authorities to release her because she was young, she was in pregnancy, and she got no idea what happened because it was responsibility of the mayor itself, not the wife of the mayor.
Okay, thank you for bringing this example. So we are now going to end some organizational details because it is only the end of our discussion, not the end of our meeting. And we will now have a short technical break. It will take maximum 10 minutes, I think. And the online broadcast of our conference will end now. We are going to present to you the film which is dedicated to Ulma family, the documentary film production. And thank you to all the participants who watched our discussions on the YouTube and Facebook channels. And thank you to the audience present with us here in Aula 11. We would like to invite you now to the screening of the documentary about the Ulma family and wish you a good evening. So I hope that you are going to stay with us and watch this film with us. It would be the great conclusion of our meeting. So now a short technical break.